267 people. 30,000 feet in the air. Both engines dead. Zero fuel. Freezing water below. Every adult pilot said impossible. But a 9-year-old girl in pink overalls knew something they didn't. She'd been flying since age 6, just never with engines. Now she had 8 minutes to save everyone. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Her name was Sophie Chen. She was 9 years old. She sat in seat 22A on Delta Flight 463, a window seat in economy class. The Boeing 737-800 was flying from Chicago O'Hare to Boston Logan. There were 267 passengers and crew on board. Sophie was small and skinny, wearing pink overalls over a white t-shirt with a cartoon cloud that said, "I heart suit thermals." Her black hair was in pigtails with purple ribbons. Under her arm was a stuffed toy eagle named Soar. Her nose pressed against the window, watching the wing, the flaps, how air moved over metal. The businessman in 22B typed emails. The teenager in 22C had headphones blasting music. Neither noticed Sophie. Nobody on this flight knew that Sophie Chen wasn't just watching the wing for fun. She was analyzing it. Checking angle of attack. Estimating lift coefficient. Reading air pressure. Because Sophie Chen had been flying aircraft since she was 6 years old. Not as a passenger. As a pilot. 3 years ago at Schweitzer Soaring School, upstate New York. Sophie, feel that? That's a thermal. Rising warm air. Sarah Skybird Chen was a world champion glider pilot. She held 3 world records: longest distance, 2,463 kilometers, highest altitude, 49,009 feet, longest duration, 56 hours, 15 minutes. She'd been teaching Sophie to fly since Sophie could reach the pedals standing on cushions. Close your eyes, baby. Don't look at instruments. Feel the air. 6-year-old Sophie, tiny hands on the glider's control stick, eyes squeezed shut. The left wing just lifted a little, Sophie said. Good. That's the edge of a thermal. Turn into it. Gently. Sophie banked left. The glider climbed, no engine, no fuel, just Sophie reading invisible currents of air. I did it, Mommy. I'm flying. No, baby. You're not flying. You're soaring. Birds fly. We soar. By age 7, Sophie had 100 glider hours. By age 8, 250 hours. By age 9, today, she had 412 hours of unpowered flight experience. She held the junior world record for youngest person to complete a 300-kilometer cross-country glider flight. She'd flown in thunderstorms with her mom supervising. She'd landed in fields when thermals died. She'd done dead-stick landings onto runways with zero airspeed margin. She'd never flown anything with an engine. But she knew something most pilots didn't: engines are optional. Wings are all you need if you know how to read the sky. Today, Sophie was flying commercial to visit her grandmother in Boston. Her mom couldn't come, competition in Germany. Sophie was flying alone as an unaccompanied minor. The flight attendant checked on her twice, gave her a little wings pin, asked if she wanted coloring books. Sophie politely declined. She didn't need coloring books. She had the window. And the sky. 30,000 feet over Lake Michigan. 90 minutes into the flight. Sophie was watching the wing when she noticed something wrong. A thin stream of liquid trailing from the wing root, catching sunlight, turning to mist. That's not condensation, Sophie thought. That's fuel. She sat up, heart pounding. Then the other wing, same thing. Fuel streaming, vaporizing. Sophie knew aircraft systems from her mom's technical training. Fuel shouldn't be venting from both wings simultaneously. That was a catastrophic leak. Before she could process this, the plane shuddered. The engine's pitch changed, higher, strained, hungry. Over the intercom, Captain Webb's voice, calm but wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor fuel system indicator issue. Nothing to be concerned about. We're troubleshooting. Sophie knew that was a lie. Because fuel wasn't just indicating low. It was gone. In the cockpit of Flight 463, the atmosphere was very different from the calm announcement Captain Webb had just made. Captain Marcus Webb was 52 years old. He'd been flying for 23 years, accumulating over 15,000 hours in everything from small Cessnas to Boeing 777s. He'd handled emergencies before, engine failures, hydraulic problems, even a bird strike that took out an engine on takeoff. He was trained for this. He was supposed to stay calm. But his hands were shaking as he stared at the fuel gauges. Both fuel quantity indicators were dropping like stones thrown off a cliff. First Officer Jennifer Park sat in the right seat. She was 34, ex-Navy, had flown F/A-18 Super Hornets off aircraft carriers before transitioning to civilian aviation. She had over 6,000 hours and was one of the sharpest pilots Webb had ever flown with. Right now, she was running through emergency checklists so fast the pages of the quick reference handbook were fluttering. Both fuel pumps failed, Park said, her voice tight and controlled, but Webb could hear the fear underneath. We're losing fuel from both main tanks. Transfer pumps aren't responding. Crossfeed won't engage. It's like the entire fuel system just died. Webb's face had gone pale. He keyed the radio, Chicago Center, Delta 463, we need to declare an emergency. We have a fuel system failure, showing rapid fuel loss from both tanks. Delta 463, Chicago Center, Roger. State your intentions. We need vectors to the nearest suitable airport. We're showing. He looked at the gauges again, hoping they'd changed. They hadn't. We're showing critical fuel levels. Park was typing frantically on the flight management computer, pulling up airports. Captain, Milwaukee Mitchell is 47 miles southwest. But at our current fuel burn rate and the rate we're losing fuel from the leak. How much time do we have? Park did the math. Her face went white. Left tank, 800 pounds remaining. Right tank, 600 pounds. At current burn rate of 180 pounds per minute per engine, we have 8 minutes before flameout. Maybe less. 8 minutes before both engines died. 8 minutes before this 150,000-pound aircraft became the world's heaviest glider. 8 minutes before 267 people faced almost certain death. Milwaukee Mitchell? Webb asked desperately. Park shook her head, checking the navigation display. Negative. We can't make it. Even if we started descending right now to reduce fuel burn, we'd need 12 minutes to get there. We have 8. Then where can we make it? Park ran more calculations, checking every airport within range. Chicago O'Hare, too far behind them. Detroit Metro, way too far east. Green Bay, too far north. Captain. Her voice cracked. Nowhere. We're over Lake Michigan. We're 40 miles from the nearest shoreline. No airports within our current glide range once the engines quit. We're going to lose engines over open water with 267 people on board. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Webb keyed the radio again. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Chicago Center, Delta 463, dual fuel pump failure, catastrophic fuel loss from both tanks, estimating 6 minutes to flameout. We need immediate vectors to nearest suitable. He stopped mid-sentence. Because there was no nearest suitable airport they could reach. Not with 6 minutes of fuel. Not over Lake Michigan. The silence in the cockpit was deafening. Then Webb said quietly, his voice hollow, we're going to have to ditch in Lake Michigan. In November. Water temperature is about 40 degrees. Survival time in water that cold is 15 to 30 minutes before hypothermia causes loss of consciousness. Even with life vests. Park pulled up the ditching checklist, but her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold the handbook. Coast Guard response time to this area is at least 45 minutes. Some passengers might survive if we get the rafts deployed quickly, but most will die before rescue arrives," Webb finished. Park was crying now, tears streaming down her face even as she maintained her professional composure. "There has to be another option. There has to be." Webb looked out the cockpit window at the vast expanse of Lake Michigan below them. Dark blue water stretching to the horizon. Beautiful and deadly. "There isn't," he said. "Alert the cabin crew. Prepare for water landing. And may God help us all." Flight attendant Linda Martinez stood at the front of the cabin, her face pale but composed. She'd been through ditching training. Every flight attendant had. They practiced it in pools, reviewed it in recurrent training. But training and reality were two very different things. She picked up the PA microphone. Her hand was shaking. She took a deep breath and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, please listen very carefully to the following instructions. We are going to make an emergency water landing. This is not a drill. Please remove all sharp objects including pens, eyeglasses, and jewelry. Remove your shoes. When I say, brace, you will lean forward and place your hands over your head like this." The cabin erupted. Screaming. Crying. Praying. Parents grabbed their children and held them tight. People pulled out phones to call loved ones. A woman in row 15 was hyperventilating into a paper bag. A man in row 8 was frozen, staring straight ahead in shock. "Please remain calm," Linda continued, her voice breaking. "Listen to your flight attendants. We will do everything we can to." But Sophie wasn't listening to the announcement. She was listening to something else. She was listening to the sky. Her mind was racing through everything she knew, every hour she'd spent in gliders, every lesson her mother had taught her. Water landing equals death for most people. The shock of hitting 40-degree water would cause many people to gasp involuntarily, inhaling water. Cold shock would make swimming nearly impossible. Hypothermia would set in within minutes. Even with life vests, even with rafts, the survival rate would be low. Very low. But as she sat there, pressed against the window, she'd been watching something the pilots probably hadn't noticed. She'd been watching the sky the entire flight. As she always did. Reading it like her mother had taught her. And she'd seen something important. Cumulus clouds forming to the northwest. Big, puffy clouds with flat bottoms and growing tops. Developing over the lake. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Big cumulus clouds don't form over water unless there's something underneath causing rising air. It could be a shallow area where the sun heats the lake bottom. It could be a temperature differential. But wherever you see cumulus, there's lift underneath. Thermals. Rising air." And Sophie knew something that the pilots, despite their thousands of hours of experience, probably didn't know. A Boeing 737 is just a really big, heavy glider when the engines quit. And gliders can fly for hours, can travel hundreds of miles, if you know how to find thermals. Sophie's heart was pounding. Her mind was working through calculations. Boeing 737 glide ratio, approximately 17:1. That meant for every mile of altitude, the plane could glide 17 miles forward. Current altitude, about 30,000 feet, which was roughly 6 miles. Glide range, 6 miles times 17 equals about 102 miles. But they were 40 miles from shore. If they could extend their glide even a little bit using thermals, they might make it to land. It was possible. It was risky. But it was better than ditching in freezing water. Sophie unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Sit down, honey," Linda said, rushing over immediately. "We're preparing for ditching. You need to stay seated and buckled." "I need to talk to the pilots," Sophie said. "Sweetie, the pilots are very busy right now. They're handling an emergency. You need to. We don't have to ditch." Sophie shouted, and the force in her 9-year-old voice made Linda stop in her tracks. Several passengers turned to look at this small girl standing in the aisle during an emergency. Sophie looked up at Linda and said very clearly, very calmly, My mom is Sarah Chen. Skybird Chen. She holds 3 world records for glider flight. She taught me to fly gliders since I was 6 years old. I have over 400 hours of unpowered flight time. And I know how to fly this plane with no engines. Linda stared at this tiny 9-year-old in pink overalls making an impossible claim. I saw clouds out the window, Sophie continued urgently. Cumulus clouds to the northwest. They mark thermals, rising air currents. If we glide into them, we can use the rising air to extend our glide range. Maybe long enough to reach land instead of ditching in the lake. Linda's training said to keep passengers seated during an emergency. Every instinct said this was crazy. But Linda had also heard of Skybird Chen. Everyone in aviation had. And this girl's eyes, they weren't the eyes of a scared child making things up. They were focused, determined, knowledgeable. Linda made a split-second decision that would save 267 lives. Come with me, she said, taking Sophie's hand. Linda knocked on the cockpit door. 3 hard raps. Not now. Captain Webb's voice came through the door, stressed and sharp. Captain, I have a passenger who says she can help, Linda called through the door. We're busy, Linda. We're preparing for ditching. She's a glider pilot, Captain. She says there's another option. There was a pause. Then the cockpit door lock clicked open. Linda opened the door and Sophie stepped into the cockpit. She was so small she could barely see over the center console between the 2 pilot seats. The cockpit seemed enormous to her, filled with screens and switches and lights. Captain Webb glanced back over his shoulder. His face was drawn, exhausted, terrified. When he saw Sophie, he looked confused. Who? Get her out of here. We're in the middle of an emergency. Captain, Linda said firmly, she says she's a glider pilot. She says there's another option besides ditching. She's 9 years old. Webb shouted. We don't have time for. I'm 9 years old with 412 glider hours, Sophie interrupted, her voice steady despite her heart hammering in her chest. My mom is Sarah Chen. Skybird Chen. 3 world records. She taught me to fly gliders since I was 6. I've never flown anything with an engine. But I know how to fly without engines. And that's what you're about to need. First Officer Park turned in her seat, staring at Sophie. Wait. Sarah Chen. Skybird. The documentary pilot. The woman who flew 56 hours straight. That's my mom, Sophie confirmed. And she taught me everything she knows. Including how to soar using thermals, rising air currents created by ground heating. There's a thermal field 12 miles northwest of our current position. I can see the cumulus clouds marking it from my seat in 22A. Webb shook his head. Kid, I appreciate that you want to help, but gliders weigh 1,000 pounds. This 737 weighs 150,000 pounds. You can't glide something this heavy. The physics don't. Yes you can, Sophie interrupted. I know the physics exactly. Glide ratio for a Boeing 737 with engines off is approximately 17:1. That means for every mile of altitude, you can glide 17 miles forward horizontally. You're currently at 30,000 feet, which is about 5.7 miles of altitude. So you have roughly 97 miles of glide range if you maintain best glide speed and if you're efficient with your energy management. Park's jaw actually dropped open. She's right. That's exactly right. I just calculated it 3 minutes ago. Webb stared at Sophie with new eyes. How do you know that? Because my mom made me study aircraft performance data for every commercial aircraft. She said if I'm going to be a passenger, I should understand how the aircraft works. But here's the problem, glide range doesn't matter if you're over water and the nearest land is farther than your glide range. Unless you find rising air, thermals, that push you back up. Even gaining a few hundred feet can extend your glide range by miles. Enough to reach shore instead of ditching. Webb checked the fuel gauge. The needles were nearly on empty. We have maybe 4 minutes of engine power left. Then we're gliding whether we like it or not. Then let me help you, Sophie pleaded, stepping closer. I've flown 412 hours without engines. You've flown 15,000 hours with engines. But in 4 minutes, when those engines quit, I'll be the expert and you'll be the student. Please. Let me help you save these people. A long, heavy pause filled the cockpit. The engines droned on, hungrily burning the last drops of fuel. The fuel gauges continued dropping. Outside the window, Lake Michigan stretched endlessly below. Then Captain Marcus Webb made the decision that would save 267 lives. Jennifer, cancel the ditching preparation. Start descending, heading 310, toward those clouds the kid mentioned. And Sophie, what did you say your name was? Sophie Chen, sir. Sophie Chen, you just became our glider flight instructor. Don't let us down. I won't, Captain. My mom taught me that panic makes you fall, but calm makes you soar. We're going to soar. Sophie positioned herself between the two pilot seats, standing on her tiptoes to see all the instruments. Her stuffed eagle soar was still tucked under her arm. Park looked at her. Do you want to sit down? I can get you a jumpsuit. No time, Sophie said. We need to prepare for engine failure. It's coming soon. She pointed out the front windscreen toward the northwest. See those cumulus clouds building at our 11 o'clock position? The ones with flat bases at about 4,000 feet and puffy tops growing upward. Webb squinted. I see them. Look like normal fair weather cumulus. They are, Sophie confirmed. But they mark thermals. Each one of those clouds formed because warm air rose from the surface, cooled as it climbed, and the moisture condensed into visible cloud at the condensation level. The cloud is just the top part. Underneath each cloud is a column of rising air, a thermal. The bigger the cloud, the stronger the thermal. Park was listening intently. How do we use them? When the engines quit, you'll be descending. Your glide ratio gives you about 100 miles of range, but we're farther than that from land. We need to enter those thermals to slow our descent or even gain altitude. Each thermal we catch can extend our glide by 10 or 15 miles. How do we find the thermals if we can't see them? Webb asked. Sophie smiled. This was her world. The clouds mark their location, but you need to feel them too. When you enter a thermal, the air is moving upward. You'll feel a slight lift. The plane might shake a little from turbulence at the thermal boundary. Your vertical speed indicator will show reduced descent or even a climb. That's when you start circling. Circling. In a 737. It's the same principle as a glider, just bigger circles because your turning radius is larger. You want a standard rate turn, about 3 degrees per second of turn rate. Bank angle should be 15 degrees maximum to minimize your sink rate. Too steep and you'll descend faster. Too shallow and you'll drift out of the thermal. Webb was starting to understand. So we circle inside the rising air, like a bird riding an updraft. Exactly. Hawks and eagles do it all the time. They find a thermal and spiral upward without flapping once. We'll do the same thing. Park checked the navigation display and did some quick calculations. Captain, if she's right about the thermals, and if we can extend our glide by even 20 miles, we can reach the Ludington shoreline. There's Mason County Airport, 5,400-foot runway. That's tight for a 737, Webb said. My mom landed a glider on a 2,000-foot grass strip in Montana once, Sophie said. In a crosswind. You have almost 3 times that much runway. And I'll talk you through the approach if we make it that far. When we make it that far, Park corrected, and Sophie saw she was smiling despite the tears on her face. Webb made the decision. Jennifer, start descending now. Maintain 250 knots. Heading 310 toward that cloud field. Sophie, you coach us through this. Tell us everything we need to know. First thing, Sophie said, when the engines flame out, don't panic. The plane won't fall out of the sky. It'll just become a glider. A heavy glider, but a glider. The flight controls will still work. You have hydraulics from the RAT, the ram air turbine, right? Park nodded, impressed. Yes. When we lose engine power, a small turbine deploys into the airstream and powers the hydraulics. Good. So you'll still have control. The plane will want to descend at about 1,200 feet per minute at best glide speed. That's normal. Don't fight it. Just guide it toward the thermals and let the rising air do the work. The fuel gauges were nearly on empty now. Captain, Park said quietly, we have about 2 minutes of fuel remaining. Webb keyed the PA, ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. In approximately 2 minutes, we will experience a complete loss of engine power due to fuel exhaustion. The aircraft will continue to fly, but we will be gliding. We have a glider pilot on board who is assisting us. We are attempting to reach the Michigan shoreline. Remain calm. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for possible emergency landing. In the cabin, the announcement caused fresh panic, but Linda and the other flight attendants moved through the rows, enforcing calm, checking seatbelts, preparing people. In the cockpit, Sophie watched the clouds getting closer. Okay, she said, in about 90 seconds, those engines are going to quit. When they do, I need you to slow to 180 knots, that's your best glide speed for this weight. The plane will be quieter than you've ever heard it. The only sound will be wind over the wings. Don't let that scare you. Quiet is normal in a glider. Webb gripped the yoke. I've never flown a dead stick landing in a jet. You're about to, Sophie said. But you're not alone. I've done hundreds of dead stick landings. Just listen to me and trust what I tell you. Park reached over and squeezed Sophie's shoulder. Thank you for being on this flight. Thank my mom, Sophie said. She's the one who taught me that wings don't need engines to fly. And then, at 28,400 feet over Lake Michigan, both engines coughed, sputtered, and died. The change was dramatic and terrifying. The constant roar that had filled the cockpit for the entire flight, the sound that passengers learned to tune out, that became background noise, suddenly stopped. The engine spooled down with a descending whine, like a giant mechanical sigh, and then there was just silence. Not complete silence. There was the rush of air over the fuselage. The creak of the airframe. The electronic beeps of instruments. But the absence of engine noise was profound, eerie, wrong. Every instinct in Captain Webb's body was screaming that something was horribly wrong, that they were about to fall from the sky. But they didn't fall. The plane kept flying. Engines flamed out, Park reported, her voice tight. Both engines, complete loss of thrust. We're gliding. The master warning lights illuminated. Alarms chimed. The cockpit was alive with warnings about engine failure, low fuel pressure, hydraulic issues. Webb silenced the warnings. They didn't need alarms telling them what they already knew. Flight controls, he asked. RAT deployed automatically, Park confirmed, watching the hydraulic pressure gauges. We have hydraulic power. Flight controls are responsive. Altitude? 28,400 feet and descending. Vertical speed 1,100 feet per minute. Sophie stepped closer. Speed? Webb checked. 210 knots. Slow to 180 knots, Sophie instructed. That's your best glide speed. You'll maximize your range. Webb pulled back gently on the yoke. The nose came up slightly. Airspeed decreased. 180 knots, he confirmed. Perfect. Now watch your vertical speed indicator. You should be descending at about 1,200 feet per minute. That's your baseline. That's normal glide performance. Park watched the gauge. 1,150 feet per minute descent. Good, Sophie said. She pointed at the clouds ahead, now only about 8 miles away. In about 3 minutes, we'll reach that first thermal. You'll know you're entering it when the plane shakes a little and your vertical speed improves. In the cabin, Passengers were experiencing something they'd never felt before, an airliner in silent flight. Some were praying. Some were crying quietly. Parents held children. Strangers held hands. The businessman in 22B was staring at Sophie's empty seat, finally realizing the little girl who'd been sitting next to him was gone. The teenager in 22C had taken off her headphones and was looking out the window with wide, terrified eyes. Linda moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts, speaking calmly to passengers, trying to maintain order even though her own heart was racing. Back in the cockpit. Altitude 27,800 feet, Park called out. Still descending 1,200 feet per minute. Distance to shore, 38 miles. Sophie did the math in her head. At 1,200 feet per minute descent, they had about 23 minutes before they'd hit the water. At their current ground speed, they'd cover about 30 miles in that time. Not enough. They needed those thermals. 2 minutes to the first cloud, Sophie said, watching it grow closer. Start a gentle turn to the left in about 60 seconds. We want to enter the thermal at its edge, not the center. The strongest lift is usually at the edge. How will we know exactly where it is? Webb asked. You'll feel it. I promise. Your body will tell you when you're in rising air. They glided on through the silent sky. Every second that passed, they lost 20 feet of altitude. Passengers watched out windows. Some noticed they were over water. Some noticed the clouds ahead. None of them understood what was happening, what this little girl in the cockpit was attempting to do. 30 seconds, Sophie said. Start your turn now. Gentle left bank, 15 degrees. Webb pushed the yoke slightly left and applied left rudder. The massive Boeing began to turn. They entered the cloud's vicinity. The cumulus was about 1,000 feet below them, marking the top of the thermal. Easy, Sophie coached. Hold your bank angle steady. Wait for it, wait for it. And then it happened. The plane shuddered, a distinct shake that was different from normal turbulence. The nose lifted slightly, as if an invisible hand had pushed up on the belly of the aircraft. Park's eyes went wide. Vertical speed indicator just dropped from 1,200 to 800 feet per minute. We're descending slower. You found the edge of the thermal. Sophie exclaimed. Now hold your turn. Keep circling inside it. This is where the magic happens. Webb maintained the bank, his hands steady on the yoke. The Boeing 737, all 150,000 pounds of it, began circling in the thermal like a massive bird. The descent rate continued to decrease. 1,200 feet per minute. 900, 700. 500. It's working, Webb breathed, unable to believe what he was seeing. We're barely descending. We're almost floating. You're soaring. Sophie said, grinning. You're using the rising air. The thermal is pushing you up almost as fast as gravity is pulling you down. They circled 3 times in the thermal. With each circle, they stayed at roughly the same altitude, losing only 50 feet per minute instead of 1,200. In those 3 circles, covering about 2 minutes of time, they extended their glide range by over 4 miles. Okay, Sophie said, watching the instruments and feeling the air. This thermal is starting to weaken. I can feel it, the lift is less smooth, more broken. We need to exit and head for the next one. Where? Park asked. Sophie pointed. That cloud cluster, about 6 miles ahead at our 11 o'clock. See the bigger cloud on the left? That one should have strong lift. Webb rolled out of the turn, wings level, and aimed for the next cloud. Immediately, their descent rate increased back to 1,200 feet per minute. They were gliding again, losing altitude, burning through their precious height. Altitude 27,400 feet, Park called. Distance to shore, 32 miles. They were getting closer. But they still needed more altitude, more time. The next thermal was 4 minutes away at their glide speed. They'd lose almost 5,000 feet getting there. Come on, Sophie whispered, watching the clouds. Be there. Please be there. For the next 14 minutes, Sophie Chen, 9 years old, 412 glider hours, taught two experienced airline pilots something they'd never learned in all their years of training. How to fly without engines. How to read the invisible sky. RAT deployed automatically, Park confirmed, watching the hydraulic pressure gauges. We have hydraulic power. Flight controls are responsive. Altitude? 28,400 feet and descending. Vertical speed 1,100 feet per minute. Sophie stepped closer. Speed? Webb checked. 210 knots. Slow to 180 knots, Sophie instructed. That's your best glide speed. You'll maximize your range. Webb pulled back gently on the yoke. The nose came up slightly. Airspeed decreased. 180 knots, he confirmed. Perfect. Now watch your vertical speed indicator. You should be descending at about 1,200 feet per minute. That's your baseline. That's normal glide performance. Park watched the gauge. 1,150 feet per minute descent. Good, Sophie said. She pointed at the clouds ahead, now only about 8 miles away. In about 3 minutes, we'll reach that first thermal. You'll know you're entering it when the plane shakes a little and your vertical speed improves. In the cabin, passengers were experiencing something they'd never felt before, an airliner in silent flight. Some were praying. Some were crying quietly. Parents held children. Strangers held hands. The businessman in 22B was staring at Sophie's empty seat, finally realizing the little girl who'd been sitting next to him was gone. The teenager in 22C had taken off her headphones and was looking out the window with wide, terrified eyes. Linda moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts, speaking calmly to passengers, trying to maintain order even though her own heart was racing. Back in the cockpit. Altitude 27,800 feet, Park called out. Still descending 1,200 feet per minute. Distance to shore, 38 miles. Sophie did the math in her head. At 1,200 feet per minute descent, they had about 23 minutes before they'd hit the water. At their current ground speed, they'd cover about 30 miles in that time. Not enough. They needed those thermals. 2 minutes to the first cloud, Sophie said, watching it grow closer. Start a gentle turn to the left in about 60 seconds. We want to enter the thermal at its edge, not the center. The strongest lift is usually at the edge. How will we know exactly where it is? Webb asked. You'll feel it. I promise. Your body will tell you when you're in rising air. They glided on through the silent sky. Every second that passed, they lost 20 feet of altitude. Passengers watched out windows. Some noticed they were over water. Some noticed the clouds ahead. None of them understood what was happening, what this little girl in the cockpit was attempting to do. 30 seconds, Sophie said. Start your turn now. Gentle left bank, 15 degrees. Webb pushed the yoke slightly left and applied left rudder. The massive Boeing began to turn. They entered the clouds' vicinity. The cumulus was about 1,000 feet below them, marking the top of the thermal. Easy, Sophie coached. Hold your bank angle steady. Wait for it, wait for it. And then it happened. The plane shuddered, a distinct shake that was different from normal turbulence. The nose lifted slightly, as if an invisible hand had pushed up on the belly of the aircraft. Park's eyes went wide. Vertical speed indicator just dropped from 1,200 to 800 feet per minute. We're descending slower. You found the edge of the thermal. Sophie exclaimed. Now hold your turn. Keep circling inside it. This is where the magic happens. Webb maintained the bank, his hands steady on the yoke. The Boeing 737, all 150,000 pounds of it, began circling in the thermal like a massive bird. The descent rate continued to decrease. 1,200 feet per minute. 900, 700. 500. It's working, Webb breathed, unable to believe what he was seeing. We're barely descending. We're almost floating. You're soaring, Sophie said, grinning. You're using the rising air. The thermal is pushing you up almost as fast as gravity is pulling you down. They circled 3 times in the thermal. With each circle, they stayed at roughly the same altitude, losing only 50 feet per minute instead of 1,200. In those 3 circles, covering about 2 minutes of time, they extended their glide range by over 4 miles. Okay, Sophie said, watching the instruments and feeling the air. This thermal is starting to weaken. I can feel it, the lift is less smooth, more broken. We need to exit and head for the next one. Where? Park asked. Sophie pointed. That cloud cluster, about 6 miles ahead at our 11 o'clock. See the bigger cloud on the left? That one should have strong lift. Webb rolled out of the turn, wings level, and aimed for the next cloud. Immediately, their descent rate increased back to 1,200 feet per minute. They were gliding again, losing altitude, burning through their precious height. Altitude 27,400 feet, Park called. Distance to shore, 32 miles. They were getting closer. But they still needed more altitude, more time. The next thermal was 4 minutes away at their glide speed. They'd lose almost 5,000 feet getting there. Come on, Sophie whispered, watching the clouds. Be there. Please be there. For the next 14 minutes, Sophie Chen, 9 years old, 412 glider hours, taught 2 experienced airline pilots something they'd never learned in all their years of training. How to fly without engines. How to read the invisible sky. How to soar. They found the second thermal right where Sophie predicted. It was stronger than the first. When they entered it, their vertical speed indicator actually went positive. They were climbing at 300 feet per minute. We're going up. Park shouted. In a dead engine 737, we're going up. That's a strong thermal, Sophie explained. Probably 800 feet per minute of lift. The plane is sinking through the air at 1,200 feet per minute, but the air itself is rising at 800 feet per minute, so net effect is we're only descending 400 feet per minute through the thermal. And if we're in the core where it's strongest, we can actually climb. They circled 5 times in that thermal, actually gaining 600 feet of altitude. When they exited, they were at 27,900 feet instead of 26,000. That extra altitude bought them 10 more miles of glide range. The third thermal was weaker, but Sophie coached them through it anyway. Even weak lift is better than sinking. Take what the sky gives you. In the cabin, passengers were starting to notice the pattern. The plane would circle, then fly straight, then circle again. Some thought the pilots were buying time before ditching. Some thought they were lost. Only Linda, watching from the forward galley, understood. That little girl was guiding them toward something. Toward hope. By the time they exited the third thermal, they were at 24,600 feet. Distance to shore, 18 miles. We're going to make it, Park said, hope creeping into her voice. At this rate, we'll reach land. One more thermal, Sophie said. There's a big one forming right over the shoreline. See that cloud building? If we can catch that one, we'll have enough altitude to reach the airport easily. Webb turned toward it. Sophie, I don't know what to say. You're saving our lives. My mom saved your lives, Sophie corrected. She taught me all this. I'm just sharing what she gave me. They glided toward the final thermal. Altitude bleeding away with each second. 23,000 feet. 22,500, 22,000. The shoreline was visible now. They could see Ludington, Michigan. Could see Mason County Airport. But they were still 2,500 feet too low to make it. Come on, Webb muttered. Where's that thermal, Sophie? Right ahead, Sophie said, though she couldn't hide the nervousness in her voice now. It should be right ahead. The cloud is there. The lift should be underneath it. 21,000 feet. Distance to runway, 12 miles. They needed to be at 7,000 feet when they reached the runway for a normal approach. Right now, at their current descent rate, they'd arrive at 4,000 feet. Too low. They'd crash into Lake Michigan just short of the runway. There. Sophie shouted. I see birds. See those gulls circling? They found the thermal. Aim for the birds. Webb turned slightly left, toward a group of seagulls that were indeed circling in a tight spiral. The plane shuddered. The nose lifted. Vertical speed, 200 feet per minute descent. Park called. We're in it. But this thermal was different. It was broken, turbulent, inconsistent. The lift would surge, then disappear, then surge again. It's rough, Sophie said. The thermal is being disrupted by the shoreline, the boundary between water and land creates turbulence. But there's lift here. You just have to work for it. Small corrections, stay patient. Webb circled carefully, feeling the plane rise and fall in the uneven air. They managed 2 full circles before the thermal dissipated completely. But it was enough. They'd gained 800 feet. Altitude, 21,300 feet. Distance to runway, 9 miles. Sophie did the math. You're high enough now. Exit the thermal and make straight for the airport. Webb rolled wings level and aimed for Mason County Airport. They could see it clearly now. A small airport with 2 runways forming an X, runway September 27 was 5,400 feet long. Plenty long enough. If they could reach it. Altitude 20,800, Park said. Distance 8 miles. We're going to be close. We'll make it, Sophie said with confidence. Trust your glide ratio. Trust the wings. Webb keyed the radio, Mason County Tower, Delta 463, we are an emergency aircraft, gliding with no engine power, 267 souls on board, requesting landing runway 09. The tower controller's voice came back, shaking, Delta 463, you're cleared to land runway 09. Say your position and altitude. 8 miles northwest, 19,000 feet, descending unpowered. There was a pause. Then, Roger Delta 463. Emergency equipment is rolling. The airport is being evacuated. You are cleared for straight-in approach runway 09. Winds are 090 at 12 knots. Godspeed. Fire trucks were already racing down the airport access roads. Ambulances lined up. The small airport had called in every emergency vehicle from 3 counties. Local news helicopters were scrambling to get airborne. Below in Ludington, people were coming out of buildings, looking up at the sky, watching a silent airliner glide toward them. In the cockpit. Altitude 15,000 feet, Park called. Distance 6 miles. I'm showing we'll arrive at the runway threshold at approximately 1,200 feet. That's high enough for a normal approach. Nothing about this is normal, Webb said, but he allowed himself a small smile. 12,000 feet. 4 miles. Sophie was watching everything, airspeed, altitude, descent rate, distance to runway. Her mind was calculating constantly, adjusting, planning. At 3 miles out, you'll want to start configuring for landing, she said. But remember, every time you add drag, landing gear, flaps, you'll descend faster. So you need to time it carefully. I've done thousands of approaches, Webb said. But never without engines. It's the same, Sophie assured him. Just more commitment. In a glider, we call it energy management. You can't add power, so you have to get it right the first time. 10,000 feet. 3 miles out. Okay, Sophie said. Landing gear down now. Webb reached for the gear lever and pulled it down. They heard the mechanical sound of the gear extending. 3 green lights, nose gear down and locked, left main down and locked, right main down and locked. But the gear created massive drag. The descent rate increased immediately. Vertical speed now 1,800 feet per minute. Park called out, alarm in her voice. We're coming down fast. That's expected, Sophie said calmly. The gear creates a lot of drag. But you're still high enough. Watch your altitude versus distance. You're perfect. 8,000 feet. 2 miles out. The runway was clearly visible now. They could see the numbers painted on the concrete, 09. 1 mile out, Park said. Altitude 6,500 feet. Flaps 5, Sophie instructed. Webb moved the flap lever. The flaps began extending. More drag. The nose pitched down slightly. Descent rate increased to 2,000 feet per minute. Some passengers were screaming. The angle of descent felt wrong, too steep, like they were falling. But Sophie knew better. You're on perfect glide path. Flaps 15 now. More flaps. More drag. The plane settled into a steeper descent. 4,000 feet. Half mile out. They were going to make it. They were actually going to make it. Flaps 30, Sophie said. Full landing configuration. The flaps extended fully. The plane's descent steepened dramatically. But they were over the runway threshold now. 2,000 feet altitude. Right on glide path. This is a normal approach now, Sophie said. Just like you've done 10,000 times before. Except you can't add power if you're too low, so aim for the first third of the runway. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. The runway was rushing up. Webb had his hands on the yoke, feeling the aircraft, judging the flare. 200 feet. Remember, Sophie said quietly, the flare will be harder without engine thrust to cushion it. You'll need to pull back more than normal. 100 feet. Webb's years of experience took over. He could feel it. He knew exactly when to flare. 50 feet. Now. Sophie said. Webb pulled back on the yoke smoothly. The nose rose. The descent rate decreased. The main wheels touched the runway, firm, but controlled. A perfect landing. The plane rolled down the runway with no thrust reversers, because there were no engines running, just aerodynamic drag from the deployed flaps and spoilers, and wheel brakes. It rolled, and rolled, and rolled. Park was watching the distance markers flash past. 4,000 feet remaining. 3,000, 2,000. Finally, the plane slowed to taxi speed. 1,000 feet remaining, Park said. We're stopped. Webb brought the aircraft to a complete stop 600 feet from the end of the runway. For a moment, nobody in the cockpit moved. Nobody spoke. Then Webb reached over and shut down all the aircraft systems. The cockpit went dark except for emergency battery power. In the cabin, there was absolute silence. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then everyone. The cabin erupted in applause, crying, screaming joy, people hugging strangers, parents kissing their children. Webb and Park sat motionless, hands shaking, tears streaming down their faces. Sophie smiled and hugged her stuffed eagle. See, soar. I told you. Wings don't need engines. When the aircraft door opened, emergency crews rushed aboard expecting casualties, injuries, trauma. Instead they found 267 people who were shaken but completely unharmed. Not a single injury. A perfect landing with zero fuel and zero engines. The passengers emerged slowly, many still crying, many stopping to hug the flight attendants, many asking to meet the pilots. And everyone wanted to meet the little girl. Sophie stepped out of the aircraft holding Linda's hand. She squinted in the sunlight. News cameras were everywhere. Reporters were shouting questions. A CNN reporter pushed forward, "Are you the girl who saved the plane?" Sophie looked up at Linda, uncertain. Linda squeezed her hand. Go ahead, honey. Tell them. My name is Sophie Chen, she said to the camera. I'm 9 years old. My mom taught me to fly gliders. When the engine stopped, I just did what she taught me. I found thermals and told the pilots how to use them to stay in the air long enough to reach land. How did you know about thermals? My mom says the sky is always teaching you things if you know how to listen. I was listening. Captain Webb emerged from the aircraft. When he saw the reporters, he walked straight over to Sophie, knelt down to her level, and hugged her. This child, he said to the cameras, his voice breaking, saved 267 lives today. She has 412 hours of glider experience. I have 15,000 hours of powered flight. But when our engines died, SHE was the expert. She taught me that I didn't know everything. She taught me to listen. She taught me that a 9-year-old can know something that a 50-year-old captain doesn't. And because I listened to her, everyone lived. The footage would play on every news channel in the world within hours. Within 6 hours, Sophie Chen was the most famous child in the world. 9-year-old glider pilot saves 267 lives using thermals. Girl teaches airline pilots to soar without engines. Daughter of world champion uses dead stick skills to land dead plane. The NTSB launched an immediate investigation. What they found shocked the aviation world. The fuel pump failure was caused by a manufacturing defect in a specific batch of fuel pump control units. The same defective part was installed on 847 Boeing aircraft worldwide, roughly 1/3 of the 737 fleet. An emergency airworthiness directive was issued immediately. Every aircraft with the suspect part was grounded until it could be inspected and replaced. The manufacturer issued a recall. It was estimated that Sophie's actions had potentially prevented dozens of future accidents. But the story everyone focused on was simpler. A 9-year-old girl with 412 glider hours had done what seemed impossible. She'd extended a powerless Boeing 737's glide range by 34 miles using thermal soaring techniques, enough to reach land instead of ditching in Lake Michigan. Every glider pilot in the world understood what she'd done. They knew how hard it was to find thermals, to stay in them, to hop from one to another. And she'd done it in a 150,000-pound airliner with 267 terrified people aboard. That night, Sophie sat in a hotel room in Ludington with Linda, who'd volunteered to stay with her until family arrived. The phone rang. Sophie picked it up. Hello. Sophie. Oh my God, Sophie. Baby, are you okay? Hi, Mommy. Sophie said, grinning. I'm fine. Sarah, Skybird, Chen was crying so hard she could barely speak. I was in the middle of my competition flight and they radioed me. They told me to land immediately. They said you were on a plane that lost its engines. I thought. I'm okay, Mommy. Everyone's okay. They said you used thermals. You used thermal soaring on a Boeing 737. Just like you taught me. I found 3 good ones over the lake and 1 more near shore. The clouds were perfect, big cumulus with lots of lift underneath. The pilots didn't know about thermals, so I taught them. We circled in the thermals just like we do, and it gave us enough altitude to reach the airport. Sarah was laughing and crying at the same time. You saved 267 people, baby. Do you understand that? You saved 267 lives using gliding techniques. I just did what you always said, Mommy. I listened to the sky. I felt the air. I trusted the wings. Oh, Sophie. I'm so proud of you. But I'm also. She paused. I'm sorry I wasn't there. It's okay. You were there. Everything you taught me was there. Every flight we ever took together. Every thermal we ever found. Every lesson. It was all there when I needed it. The competition is cancelled. I'm flying home right now. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Did you win before they cancelled? Sarah laughed through her tears. Baby, I don't care about winning. You're safe. That's all that matters. But Mommy, you should care. Because we're a team. And teams celebrate each other's victories. My victory today was landing that plane. Your victory will be winning that championship when they reschedule it. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. They talked for another hour. Sophie described every detail, finding the clouds, coaching the pilots, the turbulent thermal near shore, the perfect landing. When they finally hung up, Sophie lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She thought about all the people on that plane. The businessman who'd ignored her the whole flight. The teenager with the headphones. The parents with children. The elderly people. All 267 of them. They were alive because her mother had taught her to read the sky. They were alive because she'd spent 412 hours in gliders learning to fly without engines. They were alive because she'd known that engines are optional, but wings are eternal. 3 days later, the NTSB interviewed Sophie for 6 hours. They brought in aerospace engineers, glider experts, and commercial pilots. Sophie sat at a conference table with her stuffed eagle soar, explaining thermal dynamics using simple drawings. One engineer asked, "How did you know the Boeing 737's glide ratio?" "My mom made me study aircraft specs. She said if you're going to fly in them, you should understand them. Just in case." A commercial captain asked, "Weren't you scared?" Sophie thought about it. "No, sir. I was excited. This is what I've been training for. My mom always said every flight prepares you for the flight where everything goes wrong. This was that flight. And I was ready." The lead investigator closed his notebook. "Miss Chen, in my 30 years investigating aviation incidents, I have never seen anything like this. Your knowledge saved 267 lives. The FAA is considering making glider training mandatory for all commercial pilots. Because of you. My mom says pilots should know how to fly everything. Because the more you know, the more tools you have when things go wrong." 1 week after the incident, Delta Airlines held a formal press conference. The ballroom at a Chicago hotel was packed with reporters from around the world. Every major news network was there. The story had captured global attention. Sophie sat at a long table with Captain Webb, First Officer Park, and Delta's CEO. She wore a nice dress but insisted on keeping her I Heart Suit Thermals t-shirt underneath. Her mom sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Captain Webb spoke first. "On November 14th, I experienced complete dual-engine failure at 28,000 feet over Lake Michigan with 267 people on board. According to every scenario, every simulation, every training exercise I've ever done, we should have ditched in the water. Most of us would have died. But we didn't ditch. We landed safely at an airport. And the reason is sitting right here." He gestured to Sophie. This 9-year-old girl knew something I didn't. She had skills I lacked. And she had the courage to speak up and teach me. I've been flying for 23 years. I have over 15,000 hours. I thought I knew everything about flying. Sophie Chen taught me that I didn't. She taught me humility. She taught me to listen. And she saved 267 lives. First Officer Park spoke next. "I'm a former military pilot. I flew fighters off aircraft carriers. I've landed on ships in storms. I thought I was pretty good. But Sophie has 412 hours of glider time. When our engines failed, those 412 hours were worth more than my 6,000. She's my hero." Then it was Sophie's turn. She stood up, she was too short to be seen sitting down, and looked at the sea of cameras and reporters. "Hi," she said. "My name is Sophie Chen. I'm 9 years old. I fly gliders because my mom taught me that flying isn't about engines. It's about understanding the sky. When the engines stopped on Flight 463, I wasn't scared because I knew what to do. My mom always says, panic makes you fall, but calm makes you soar. So I stayed calm. I looked out the window. I saw clouds that marked thermals. And I knew we could use those thermals to extend our glide to shore. I just did what my mom taught me. I listened to the sky." A reporter asked, "Sophie, some people are saying you're a hero. What do you think about that? I don't think I'm a hero. I think I was lucky. Lucky that my mom taught me to fly. Lucky that I happened to be on that flight. Lucky that Captain Webb and First Officer Park listened to me even though I'm just a kid. The real heroes are the pilots who trusted me. Another reporter, what do you want to say to other kids who dream of flying? Sophie thought carefully. I want to say that age doesn't matter. Knowledge matters. If you love something, learn everything about it. Study it. Practice it. Because someday, you might be the only person who knows how to solve a problem. And when that day comes, you'll be ready. What's next for you? I'm going back to glider flying with my mom. We have a competition in Germany in 2 months. And maybe I'll start teaching more people about soaring. Because I think everyone should know that engines can fail, but if you understand the sky, you'll always find a way to stay airborne. The room erupted in applause. 4 months after Flight 463's emergency landing, the Federal Aviation Administration announced a landmark change to commercial pilot training requirements. FAA Regulation 14 CFR Part 121.441, B. 3, Glider Flight Training Requirement. Effective January 1, all commercial airline pilots seeking or renewing their Airline Transport Pilot, ATP, certification must complete a minimum of 20 hours of glider flight training, including 5 hours of thermal soaring instruction, 3 dead stick landings, 2 hours of emergency energy management training, demonstrated proficiency in unpowered flight. The regulation was immediately nicknamed Sophie's Law by the aviation community. Captain Webb personally called Sophie to tell her, "You did it, kiddo. You changed aviation forever." "I just showed people what gliders can teach," Sophie said. "You did more than that. You proved that a 9-year-old with the right knowledge can save hundreds of lives. You proved that we should never stop learning, no matter how experienced we think we are. You gave the gift of humility to every pilot in the world. Are you taking glider lessons, Captain Webb?" "I start next week. And I specifically requested that your mom be my instructor." Sophie grinned. "She'll teach you well. But be warned, she's strict. After what you did, I'll gladly be a student again." Within a year, glider schools around the country reported a 300% increase in enrollment from commercial pilots seeking to comply with Sophie's Law. Sarah Skybird Chen's school became one of the most sought-after training centers in the world. And Sophie became the youngest certified flight instructor in FAA history at age 10, approved to teach the thermal soaring component of Sophie's Law training. Every weekend, airline captains with 20,000 hours would sit in the back seat of a glider while a 10-year-old girl sat in front and taught them how to read the invisible sky. 14 months after Flight 463. International Soaring Competition, Freiburg, Germany. Sophie and Sarah stood on a podium together, gold medals around their necks. They'd just won the mother-daughter team gliding championship. They'd flown 523 kilometers in 9 hours, hopping from thermal to thermal across the German countryside, never once touching an engine because gliders don't have engines. But more importantly, Sarah had broken her own world record for distance, flying 2,547 kilometers. And Sophie, now 10 years old, had set a new junior record, 891 hours of glider flight time, more than most commercial pilots had in powered aircraft. The crowd was enormous. Thousands of spectators. Camera crews from around the world. Because everyone wanted to see the girl who'd saved Flight 463. During the award ceremony, Sophie was asked to speak. She stepped up to the microphone, still small for her age but standing tall. "1 year ago, I was on an airplane that lost both engines. I used what my mom taught me about glider flying to help the pilots land safely. Since then, a lot of people have called me a hero. They've asked me to give speeches. They've made a law named after me. But I want to say something important, I'm not special. What I did wasn't magic. It was knowledge. Knowledge that my mom gave me. Knowledge that anyone can learn. The sky is always teaching us. It's full of invisible rivers of air, thermals, mountain waves, wind currents. If you know how to read them, you'll never be stranded, even if every engine fails. My mom taught me that wings don't need engines to fly. They just need air and someone who understands how to use it. So to everyone watching, learn about the sky. Learn about weather. Learn about aerodynamics. Learn about the invisible forces that keep birds aloft and that can keep aircraft aloft too. Because someday, that knowledge might save your life. Or someone else's. The crowd gave her a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Afterwards, as they packed up their glider, Sarah hugged Sophie. You know what you've accomplished, baby? You didn't just save 267 people. You changed how the entire world thinks about flying. I learned from the best, Mommy. No, Sophie. You became the best. You took what I taught you and made it better. Made it bigger. Shared it with the world. They watched another glider launch nearby, silent, graceful, climbing on invisible currents of rising air. Do you think they'll ever forget? Sophie asked. About Flight 463? No. But that's good. Because every time a pilot goes through glider training now, every time they learn to find thermals and fly without engines, they'll remember why they're learning it. They'll remember you. And maybe, someday, one of them will face the same situation you did. And they'll be ready. Sophie looked up at the sky, clouds forming, thermals rising, the invisible architecture of the atmosphere doing its eternal dance. The sky's always there, Mommy. Always teaching. You just have to know how to listen. And you taught the world to listen. Sophie Chen is now 14 years old. She has 2,847 hours of glider flight time, more than most airline captains. She's the youngest certified flight instructor in FAA history, licensed to teach both glider flight and the Sophie's Law thermal soaring curriculum. Sophie's Soaring School, established with her mother when Sophie was 11, has trained over 1,200 commercial pilots in unpowered flight techniques. She's written 2 books. Wings Without Engines, What a 9-Year-Old Learned About Flying, Reading the Invisible Sky, A Guide to Thermal Soaring. Both are required reading at 43 flight schools worldwide. She's given a TED Talk that's been viewed 47 million times. She's been invited to speak at MIT, Caltech, and the Smithsonian. She holds 3 junior world records in glider aviation. But every year, on November 14th, the anniversary of Flight 463, Sophie does the same thing. She visits Mason County Airport in Ludington, Michigan. She stands at the end of runway 09, at the spot where a Boeing 737 landed with no fuel and no engines. Where 267 people walked away alive. Where a 9-year-old girl proved that age doesn't determine ability, that knowledge can come from unexpected sources, and that sometimes the youngest person in the room is the most qualified. This year, as she stands there, she's not alone. Captain Marcus Webb is with her. He's now chief pilot instructor at Delta Airlines, personally overseeing the Sophie's Law training program. First Officer Jennifer Park is there too. She's now a captain herself, and she teaches energy management classes to new pilots. Linda Martinez, the flight attendant who brought Sophie to the cockpit, is there. She's now a flight training manager, teaching crew resource management, including the importance of listening to everyone, regardless of age or position. And 147 of the 267 passengers from Flight 463 have come. They come every year. It's become a tradition, the Flight 463 reunion. They bring their families. They tell stories. They celebrate being alive. One woman brings her daughter, a baby who wasn't born yet on that November day 5 years ago. Sophie, the woman says, I was 8 months pregnant on Flight 463. I thought my baby would never be born. Because of you, she's here. Because of you, I got to be a mom. An elderly man approaches. I was in seat 18F. I've gotten to meet 5 more grandchildren because you gave me 5 more years. Thank you. A teenager, the same one who was sitting in 22C with headphones, says, I was sitting right next to you and didn't even notice you. Now I'm studying aerospace engineering because of you. I want to design safer aircraft. Sophie hugs them all. Listens to their stories. Shares in their joy. As the sun sets over Lake Michigan, everyone gathers at the runway threshold. Captain Webb speaks. 5 years ago, on this runway, we proved something important. We proved that knowledge matters more than age. That listening matters more than ego. That sometimes, the person with the answer is the one you least expect. Sophie Chen was 9 years old. She had 412 hours in gliders. And she knew something that my 15,000 hours hadn't taught me, that engines are optional, but understanding the sky is essential. Because she spoke up, and because we listened, 267 people lived. Marriages continued. Children were born. Grandparents met grandchildren. Careers flourished. Dreams were pursued. All because a 9-year-old girl knew how to read the invisible sky. He turns to Sophie. Thank you. Not just for saving us. But for teaching us. Sophie steps forward. She's 14 now, taller, but still that same girl with pigtails and a stuffed eagle named Soar. 5 years ago, I was scared to speak up, she says. I was just a kid. Why would anyone listen to me? But my mom always taught me, when you know something that can help, you have a responsibility to share it. Age doesn't matter. Position doesn't matter. What matters is whether you can contribute to solving the problem. So I spoke up. And Captain Webb and First Officer Park listened. They put aside their egos and their experience and they listened to a 9-year-old. That's the real lesson of Flight 463. Not that I knew about thermals. But that they were humble enough to learn from anyone, even a child. We all saved Flight 463 together. The pilots who flew. The flight attendants who kept everyone calm. The passengers who trusted us. And me, sharing what my mom taught me. Teamwork saved us. And humility. And the willingness to learn from anyone who has knowledge to share. She looks up at the darkening sky. Stars are beginning to appear. The sky is still teaching me every day. And I'm still learning. I'll never stop learning. Because the moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop growing. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for celebrating life. Thank you for remembering that on this runway, on this day 5 years ago, we proved that impossible things become possible when knowledge meets crisis, when humility meets emergency, and when someone is brave enough to speak up and say, I know how to help. The crowd applauds. People are crying. It's emotional, powerful, hopeful. As the gathering disperses, Sophie's mother approaches. Sarah Skybird Chen, now 45, still flying, still setting records, still teaching. Ready to go home, baby? Almost. One more thing. Sophie walks to the exact spot where the Boeing 737's main wheels first touched the runway 5 years ago. Someone has installed a small plaque there. Flight 463 landing site November 14, 2019. 267 souls saved through knowledge, courage, and the wisdom to listen in memory of Sophie Chen's heroism. Sophie kneels and places her hand on the plaque. Thank you, she whispers to the sky. Thank you for the thermals. Thank you for the clouds. Thank you for teaching me. The wind picks up slightly, cool and fresh off Lake Michigan. Sophie smiles. Because she can feel it, that subtle change in air pressure, that slight temperature differential. Somewhere out over the lake, a thermal is forming. Rising air. The sky, doing what it always does. Teaching. Today, Sophie Chen is the youngest person ever inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Over 5,000 commercial pilots have completed Sophie's law training. 0 aircraft with glider-trained pilots have been lost in total engine failure scenarios since the law was enacted. 3 aircraft have experienced similar fuel system failures to Flight 463, all 3 landed safely using thermal soaring techniques taught in Sophie's law training. Delta Flight 463 has been preserved and is now displayed at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum with a placard that reads, "The Boeing 737 that became a glider November 14, 2019 flown 34 miles unpowered using thermal soaring techniques taught by Sophie Chen, age 9, proving that wings don't need engines to fly, they just need someone who understands the sky. Sarah, Skybird, Chen continues to fly and teach. She's broken 2 more world records. But she says her greatest achievement isn't any record, it's teaching her daughter to read the sky. Captain Marcus Webb retired from Delta Airlines last year. He now volunteers teaching glider flight to underprivileged children, saying, "Sophie gave me my life back. I want to give other kids what she gave me, knowledge, confidence, and wings." First Officer Jennifer Park is now a Czech airman training new captains. She requires all her students to complete glider training before their captain upgrade. If Sophie's Law doesn't make you do it, she says, I will. Linda Martinez wrote a book called The Flight Attendant Who Listened, about the importance of empowering every voice, regardless of age or position. And the 267 passengers of Flight 463. They've formed a foundation that provides flight training scholarships to young people who want to learn to fly but can't afford it. They've sent 89 students through flight school so far. Because they understand, Sophie saved their lives not because she was special, but because she was educated. And education, real education, the kind that teaches you to read the world around you, to understand forces you can't see, to solve problems others think are impossible, that kind of education can save lives. This story is fiction, but the science is real. Thermals exist. Glider pilots use them every day to fly hundreds of miles without engines. The Boeing 737's glide ratio of approximately 17:1 is accurate. Sophie's Law doesn't exist, yet, but perhaps it should. Because the lesson is real, knowledge can come from anyone, at any age. And the wisdom to listen, truly listen, to anyone who might have a solution is one of the most important skills a leader can have. Captain Webb's willingness to listen to a 9-year-old saved 267 fictional lives. In the real world, how many problems could we solve if we listened to voices we usually ignore? How many children have knowledge that adults dismiss? How many, impossible, problems have solutions hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone humble enough to listen? Sophie Chen is fictional. But her lesson is eternal. Age is irrelevant when knowledge meets crisis. Engines are optional when you understand aerodynamics. Wings alone are enough, when you know how to read the invisible sky. Dedicated to every child who's been told, you're too young to understand. You're not. And someday, your knowledge might save lives.